Eskom has for several years now faced issues of capacity, management, and has been marred in allegations of corruption at the hands of its former CEOs. Load shedding has also been the bane of South Africans for more than a decade now, and it seems there's no light at the end of the tunnel. Eskom CEO under Ryter was hired back in January last year to fix the power utilities problems, but following this past week's intense Stage 4 outages, his commitment and capacity to fix Eskom are certainly in question. Dr. Trevor Ngwane from the UJ's Department of Sociology, I beg your pardon, has an opinion piece that argues that changing leaders won't help if the power utility does not rid itself of its racially biased load shedding philosophy. He joins us now via our video link for more on his thoughts. And Dr. Ngwane, thanks very much indeed for your time. It's lovely to have you on the program. Let's unpack what I just alluded to, because I think many people, will be intrigued by that. What do you mean when you speak about a racially biased load reduction philosophy?
Oh, yes. Under the Ryter, Eskom has embarked on a different kind of load shedding called load reduction. And it targets black working class areas like Gugulethu, Langa, Soweto, and other black villages, shack settlements, and townships in South Africa. So, if there is 1 hour load shedding in Sandton, in the white area, suburb, there will be 6 hours of load shedding in Mutu, Zululand, because it's a black working class area.
Is that correlation or causation? In other words, do you reckon that, I'm just fleshing out your thoughts here, do you reckon Eskom is implementing load reduction there because of, for instance, infrastructurally what's taking place, or because there are majority black people that live there?
Well, unfortunately, race, class, and gender and geography are inextricably tied together in South Africa, if you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So Eskom will say, and we know how racists operate. They use code names, Yeah, so Eskom will say the reason we're targeting Soweto is because people are not paying for their services, is because, there's illegal connections, it's because, there's a overload on the system. But all that is only because you live in Soweto in a black working class area. Those who live in Sandton never had those problems because they were rich and white and they were privileged under apartheid.
The framing is interesting because those reasons that you've just listed can be verified because they're issues of fact, right? So are there illegal connections in Soweto, I suppose, that we need to ask ourselves? Are there illegal connections in Soweto that put a burden on the system? That's a yes or no type of question that can be ascertained outside of the framework that you are using, which is one that considers the racial demographic of that area.
Of course, there are illegal connections. Of course, in Soweto, many people are unemployed. Of course, many people in Soweto are poor. Of course, many of them can't afford to pay electricity. Of course, the infrastructure in Soweto, is of a lower grade. So all these things are realities. So the question is, as leaders, as CEOs of Eskom, what do we do to address those situations? Do we make the situation worse for the people who happen to live in Soweto, or do we make it better? You can say in Soweto, people don't pay, but there are people who pay. You can say in Soweto, some people have got 10 shacks, in 1 yard, but there are people who's only 1 or 2 in a whole yard. So basically, if you live in Soweto, you get what I can call collective punishment because it's a black working class area. That is the issue.
And it's a multi-layered issue. Part of what you've said is you don't believe replacing under Ryter will help. Tell us why.
Okay. Ryter must go, but so should the whole board of Eskom, so should the ANC government, which has failed to actually address these issues of electricity, energy provision, Eskom corruption, Eskom mismanagement, Eskom commodification, Eskom financialization. So yes, the Ryter must go, but if he goes, all of them must go.
How is that going to help?
Well, we need a government which is going to prioritize basic services as a need. You know, we don't want a government which is trying to make profits from providing water, providing electricity, providing housing. And this is what we have, you know, with the ANC government.
Yeah. Of course, the long-rehearsed response from Eskom is that they've inherited all these problems and are going to need a whole lot more time to fix them. Does that not hold for you?
Yeah, well, they've inherited the problems, but what are they doing with the problems? I mean, we've also inherited poverty. I mean, how many black people, black working class people have got big bank accounts because their grandfathers and grandmothers left them money, but you must still cope and survive. So, you know, the problem is not what comes from the past, it's what we do with the legacy of the past. How do we wrong the right from the past? We shouldn't, you know, build and make worse those inheritances from the past. We shouldn't penalize people for being poor, for being black, for living in overcrowded areas. We should make their situation better. That is the issue. And that is why Ryter was hired to actually solve those problems. That is why we voted the ANC into power. That's why we have the National Liberation Movement to solve those problems. Now people are telling us, it's the legacy of apartheid, so they are not doing their job.
Yeah. I'm sure there's also room, Dr. Ngwane, you'll agree to speak about individual agency and ways through which you and I at a micro level sometimes exacerbate the situation knowingly. You have spoken of pockets in some instances of people who don't have as many dwellings in their yard, for instance, and so those individuals aren't necessarily putting pressure on the grid. But how much accountability do you reckon can still take place within communities themselves outside of pointing at a director, for instance, who sits at the helm of Eskom?
Yeah, you know, I mean, we don't want people, I don't know, who do so-called wrong things, you know, but the burden of proof and the burden of the responsibility lies with those who have the power to change the situation. So in a way, when we point to the poor people who are actually, you know, blaming the victim.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And one wonders whether things like what's happening in Glasgow can help in any way. I have no doubt you're following those developments. A lot of disappointment around what came out of the COP26 summit, which took place, in part because of a lack of what looks like a lack of political will from many governments. Help us place that development on the global stage with what happens, for instance, with people in Soweto.
Yeah, I'm so happy you're asking about COP26 because the question of climate change, global warming affects everyone in the world. And soon, you know, we'll have all these extreme weather patterns, you know, nature, animals, human beings won't survive. But as that young activist Greta Thunberg said, you know, most of what is going on at COP26 is blah, 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 hot air. People just talk, but they don't actually deliver. They don't actually walk the talk. So this is the problem the earth, you know, the world is facing. Leaders, political leaders, so-called captains of industry, CEOs, presidents, blah, 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 blah. But they are not actually doing anything to actually improve the situation. As a result, clearly, there'll be more global warming. There is a crisis, you know, devastation, you know, in the coming 10, 20, 30 years.
Certainly the type of thing that an ordinary citizen living in the southern tip of Africa doesn't want to hear. It begs the question around how citizens, ordinary people, can be more actively involved in changing the material conditions that could lead to the so-called just transition. Help us connect those dots. I mean, is there anything, for instance, that a Kokolindiwe can do in Soweto, watching COP26, to ensure that it doesn't end with just blah, blah, blah?
It just so happens that right now I'm in Cape Town in a conference where we're discussing exactly this issue. with the Alternative Information Development Center, with Naledi, with unions, COSATU, NUMSA, SAFTU, Comrade Vavi was here and some leaders from COSATU, etc. Because we are deciding that unless ordinary people, unless the working class, organizes itself and mobilizes to force these governments to do what is right, nothing is going to happen. Remember, the poorest of the poor, they suffer the most from extreme weather patterns. If you live in a shack and there's a strong wind or there's a flood, a typhoon, your house is the first one to blow away. If you lose a job because of climate change, if you lose a job because of carbon taxes, it's mostly the working class. So the people in Soweto, the people in Soshanguve, they have to learn about these problems, organize themselves, build movements, and fight so that they put pressure on these governments to do the right thing. In fact, the best thing is to overthrow, get rid of these governments, and have governments who do the right thing.
Dr. Trevor Ngwane is an academic with the University of Johannesburg's Sociology Department. Thanks very much indeed for your multi-layered take on issues around the provision of energy in this country, how that links to the leadership at Eskom, and how we fit into the global picture, at least on the back of the COP26 summit. Once again, really do appreciate your thoughts.